I've noticed that Twitter has become a lot more toxic and unpleasant over the last couple years, and I've tried my best to keep my Twitter feed as positive and welcoming as I possibly can, which is challenging, but the trick to it I've found is following a lot of indie game devs and interacting with them, watching their gameplay, watching them show off what they're creating, and it really helps make the website a much more tolerable place. One of the games that I've found while scrolling through the fantastic work of other game devs was The Spirit and the Mouse, and I was surprised that I had never heard of it before. From the gameplay shown, it looked like it was similar in a few ways to one of my favorite games of the past couple years, Stray. I immediately wishlisted it for that very reason, and it actually was given away free on Epic Games not that long ago. So I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to try the game and see how it played and if it matched my expectations. First up, in terms of the PC port, it's great, I'm happy to report. No crashes, really good performance all the way through, really good controller support. In fact, I didn't have a single issue with the game in terms of the technical performance. The art style for the game looks great. It's simple, but it suits the game really well. You can tell there was a lot of love and heart put into the creation of all the assets. It has a lot of simple charm that I really enjoyed. As for the gameplay, is it how I thought it would be? No, not really. It's not really like Stray at all, honestly. First of all, you play a fairly sentient mouse, whereas in Stray you just play a cat. In The Spirit of the Mouse, you play a mouse that is incredibly intelligent, to the point of being sentient and able to communicate with other beings. So not like Stray, but not a negative towards the game at all. It's just a very different type of game. The premise of the game is you play as a mouse who is given special spirit powers and is then given the task of helping various humans around the village that the mouse lives in, which I thought is actually just a really cute little premise. Your whole intention behind the game and finishing the game is just to help people. People have got problems in the town and you're going to help them, which I think is just a nice, compelling, simple motivation for a game. The ways that you help people are not incredibly complex. They're not going to take you 9 hours to figure out. Traversing the environment is fun. There's lots of little hidden areas and interesting locations to find. And the way that you help people and interact with the world is simple and satisfying enough that it makes the pacing of the game feel really good. It's definitely not a long game. It only took me a couple hours to complete it, but it is a perfect length for what the game is going for. It has a simple premise with a simple story, and it executes it really well, which is about all you can ask for from a good game. The writing was fun, the characters were fun, it's not a difficult game to complete in any way, and it has a satisfying, heartwarming ending, which is exactly what I wanted from this style of game. So to sum it up, this is not like Prey. It is its own thing. The Spirit and the Mouse is its own separate experience that stands on its own 4 legs, if you will, really well. So do I recommend this game? Yes. The next game is quite difficult to recommend in a lot of ways, but I do think if you get the chance to play this game, it is worth experiencing, despite all of its shortcomings and technical flaws. The next game I played is The Suffering. This was also given away free, along with its sequel on GOG, I believe, not that long ago. I wasn't terribly interested in the Suffering series at all. I'd never really heard much about it, but it was free and it did look vaguely interesting based on the screenshots and the description of the game from its store page. So I figured it's free, I got nothing to lose, I might as well try it. First of all, the PC port is an absolute mess. It is one of those older games that is pretty much broken in a lot of ways on modern computers. But I think even when it launched, I think a lot of these issues would have been at the forefront of the game. First of all, high frame rate breaks it completely. It's one of those games where you have a good performance in the game, it just bugs out and crashes, the AI breaks, the scripting breaks. A lot of the game just breaks at higher frame rates, so you're gonna have to find a way to limit the FPS if you want to play this, which I did, and even then, a lot of the game just flat out broke for me. A lot of the scripting just would not work. The graphics and the art style are really good, which is part of the reason why I actually wanted to finish the game. Usually when a game gives me this much issues and is so much of a struggle to play, I usually drop it just because I like playing things that are smooth. I like playing things that don't give me a lot of resistance. But I will say the art style, which is a crunchy PlayStation 2 art style that reminded me a lot of the games of my childhood, it really complemented the game and really gave me a reason to want to finish this game just because I wanted to see what else the game had to offer. The premise of the game is that you are an inmate in a prison. The prison is really fucking creepy, gets overtaken by monsters and science experiments, and you have to like break out of prison to survive. It's not complicated at all. You just have to run through the game and try not to die, basically. There is a few little twists and turns that make the story a little bit more interesting if you want to follow them. There is some lore behind the game. There is a lot of codex entries and stuff if you want to read about that kind of thing, which I did, and I did find that it was pretty good, but I found that the premise was just there to show you a bunch of cool stuff and for you to kill a bunch of things with guns, which I'm not complaining because that in itself is a fun premise. The game bills itself as a bit of a survival horror experience, which I don't really think that it succeeds in. You have to collect a lot of resources throughout the game, but it's mainly just ammo, and you get so much ammo throughout the game that it basically becomes just your stock standard third-person shooter. There are a few other elements it tries to incorporate, like decision making and interactive elements with a few NPCs that you find along the way, but like I said, the scripting of the game is so broken and borked that a lot of the time it just didn't work for me. The game attempts to have a morality system based on your actions with other characters, but it's pretty hard to mess this up unless you're just trying to do an evil playthrough. Basically, just don't be a dick to everyone you meet, just help them, and you'll get the good ending. The movement is super clunky. It reminds me a lot of the early Splinter Cell games, especially in the jumping and climbing animations, which for me is actually kind of a plus. Like, those animations and that movement style is so nostalgic for me that I actually didn't mind that at all. I quite liked it, but for some people it might be a real turn off. It's just an old school clunky movement system based on an earlier games. A lot of games had this back then where movement was not smooth, whether it be intentional or not. The weapons and the gunplay are actually quite satisfying, but I would say that the enemy encounters make the combat quite miserable. It's one of those games that would probably be really difficult with a controller if you weren't any good at aiming, but with a mouse and keyboard, it just made the combat really trivial, and the weapons in the game were quite powerful to the point where a lot of the enemies just weren't scary and weren't that difficult to beat. The only way the game knows how to ramp up difficulty is just to throw so many enemies at you, which is not really how I enjoy combat in games. I enjoy combat when the enemies actually simulate a little bit of a brain, when they actually have some form of tactics and it's not just rush you with thousands of enemies that you have to mow down. In some games that can be satisfying, but I find that it's quite lazy in a lot of games where they use that excuse to try and cover a poor combat loop. For the horror elements, it starts off quite strong. Like, it starts off really heavy with the horror, and I thought this was going to be quite a scary game, but as soon as you start getting guns and experiencing enemies, you realize that they just turn the enemies, even if they are really scary, into cannon fodder. The enemy designs are really inventive and I really like them, but they're not well utilized at all. They just are there for like a splash screen intro, kind of like a Borderlands thing, like, wow, isn't this enemy so scary? Anyway, here's 500 of them you're gonna fight throughout the game, and so all of their impact is lost. The map design is fun, but I did get lost a lot. There's a lot of backtracking and a lot of alternate paths that lead you to different areas, which can be interesting in terms of exploring, but it did mean that I was confused a lot of the time as to where I was supposed to go, because the game does not have a great functioning sense of pacing and where you're supposed to be going. And if the game breaks, which it does a lot, like I've mentioned, you can sometimes get like soft locked into areas and you're even more lost because you don't know if this is where the game wants you to be or if the game is just broken. The sound design is super basic, but it's effective. Like, it doesn't have any crazy good sound design or music. In fact, I can't even remember any of the tracks in the game. I don't think there's any notable music at all, which is a bit surprising for a horror game. A lot of the time, horror games try to compensate with some really interesting music choices, but for this game, just nothing grabbed me and nothing was memorable. The story, like I mentioned, is pretty straightforward, but it is campy. Got a lot of gore and fun characters with hammy writing. You know what kind of story you're getting into very quickly, just based on the intro. It doesn't try to be anything more. As I said, there was morality decisions to try to give a bit of depth to the story, but it wasn't expanded on at all, really. It was kind of just there, and a lot of the times I ended up missing them because the scripting of the friendly NPCs broke. And then the game ended very suddenly. It was not a bad ending, but it just kind of ended, like they weren't sure what to do with the game. There was a big boss fight, and then the game was kind of just over. There is a sequel that I do plan on checking out, and I'm wondering if they continue to expand upon any of the lore and the universe and the story there, but I would not be surprised if they just moved locations with a completely different premise there at all. So overall, it is worth experiencing if you can get past all of the technical shortcomings. Lastly, we have The Gunk, which is a game that I've had on my wish list for a really long time, and I've been super interested in just purely because of the art style. I found that if a game has an interesting art style, that's more than enough for me to purchase the game just to see how well they utilize the art style and if it suits the game style. And I'm happy to report that The Gunk is really, really freaking good. The PC performance was great, there was no crashes, and there was only a few areas in the game where my frame rate dipped, but it wasn't a large impact on my overall opinion of the PC performance, which was overall great. The controls worked well, the gameplay was smooth, and the art style was fantastic. It is right down my alley. I love this style. It really suits the environments and the character designs. I'd play 500 games that had this art style if I could. The game also benefits from some gorgeous environments and world building. There's just so much intricate detail in the world layout and the locations you visit, and it's combined with some fantastic lighting that just complements it in every possible way. It's just a really rock solid art style from every angle. The lighting, the environments, the character designs, the world design, enemy design, even the gameplay suits the art style really well. Speaking of gameplay, the combat loop was really fun. It was simple, but it was ideal for the style of game that we got here, and it just fed into the gameplay loop, which is really fun. The premise of the story is that you and your companion land on a planet to explore it, and some weird, freaky stuff happens, and you try to explore it to find out what's happening. That's it. I'm not going to spoil any more because it's worth experiencing if you haven't already, and I think it led to a really well-paced and engaging story. The planet felt alien and weird. It felt like there was a history there. There felt like there was much to uncover, and I just had a fun time exploring the story that the game was trying to tell. The characters were great. A lot of the times in games like this, I feel like the characters are let down, but in this game, they were some of the highlights. Out of all the praise I could give the game, the voice acting and the main cast of the game were really well performed. I really enjoyed listening to their performances. They had great dialogue, and I could tell that a lot of love went into the script for this game. Again, this game was on the shorter side, but it was perfect for this style of game. I think I finished it in under 10 hours, but none of it felt like it was being stretched, and it felt like the devs knew what kind of experience they wanted to tell, what kind of story they wanted to tell, and had the perfect amount of time to achieve that. The ending was satisfying and felt good. There's a lot of times in games where a great story and a great game can be let down by an unsatisfying ending, but this is not the case in this game. I really enjoyed the Gunk's ending. It felt good. It was a satisfying narrative conclusion to the story. The only nitpick I have for the game, and this is personal to me, is I don't think that the music suited the game. A lot of the time, if I like a game's soundtrack, I add it to my Spotify or I add it to my YouTube playlist so I can listen to it while I work or I can listen to it while I play games. The music in the game was not bad. I want to stress this. It was not bad, but I do feel like the game would have benefited from more alien music to suit the world and environments. The soundtrack was good. It was a cool acoustic-driven soundtrack that I did enjoy, but I just felt like it didn't quite match the game. There was a bit of tonal clash there, I felt. Again, this could be just me, but I felt like the game really would have benefited from some more strange and out there music to really suit this crazy world that the game was set in. Overall, this was one of my favorite games I've played this year. I rate it really highly. I definitely give it a must buy if you get the chance. It always goes on sale for really cheap, and I think it's worth every dollar, so if you get the chance, play this game. Overall, not a bad selection of games this time around. Sometimes I get a mixed bag of games to play, and this time, I would say they were overall good. Anyway, let me know what you've been playing down in the comments section below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you, beautiful people, in the next video.